you're here. I just want to remind us that this is an informational meeting. There will be no action statement. The purpose of this meeting is to provide us with an opportunity to gain a better understanding of the budget that we will be presented in August for approval. So this is an opportunity for you to hear updates on that, get more detail, and ask some questions, and feel better prepared as we move forward with this process. So with that introduction, Guthrie, would you please take the roll call?
Yes, thank you so much, Chair, Vice Chair. I will now call roll. Greg Heyman.
Present.
Emily Simnett.
Present.
Demetrius Davis-Boucher. Michael Dembro.
Here.
Richard Devlin. Helen Edwards. Jen Proctor-Andrews.
Here.
Arnel Fajardo. Evelyn Coker. Devin Lawson. Teresa Martinez.
Here.
Mary Middleton.
Here.
Jennifer Smith. Gail Yamasaki. That is our roll call, Chair. Commissioner Yamasaki and Lawson did indicate to me they'd be joining. They may just be a bit delayed.
Well, thank you so much. And I don't know if you caught it, but you saw Commissioner Devlin has joined us tonight. Okay,
yes, good. The record will reflect.
Great, man. Thank you so much, Guthrie. So again, just already represented the purpose of this meeting. And again, I want to thank you for being a part of this. And I'm going to turn it over to our Executive Director, Ben Cannon, to lead us through the single agenda item that we have.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair Heyman. Members, thanks for joining today. As the Chair noted, this is an opportunity for you to dig a little deeper into the agency request budget that staff has been preparing and will make a recommendation to you to adopt at your August meeting. The materials in today's packet are very similar to what you received related to the agency request budget in your June, in preparation for your June meeting. And I, as a result, don't intend to go over them in any detail. They include a slide deck that that establishes sort of the major sections of the HECC budget and contains those updated agency request budget figures. It includes a slightly more detailed summary on a couple of pages of the HECC's agency request budget figures. So you'll see in there sort of breakouts for each of the HECC's appropriations. It includes a list of policy option packages that we intend to recommend for inclusion within the agency request budget. These are all either revenue neutral policy option packages or qualify for an exception to the governor's restriction on requesting new funding for the 2027-29 biennium. And then finally, we've also included the 11-page discussion of how the current service level is calculated for higher education support funds, principally the Public University Support Fund and the Community College Support Fund. You know, in terms of what's different from what you've seen previously, there are some updates on the CSL figures that are the sort of core of this agency request budget. And I won't go into all of them. There are some fairly minor changes associated with the HECC's agency operations and its budget. We have an updated understanding of the funds that will be required for our operations division, for example, in connection with our workforce investments division, in connection with the transfer of some of our functions to the Oregon Employment Department. So there's some modest changes within the HECC's agency operations budget, but the primary differences between the budget figures in today's packet and what you saw in June are associated with the support funds. and in particular the support funds for community colleges and public universities, where the current service level figures are about $35 million below what we reported to you last month for the Community College Support Fund, and about $19 million below what we reported to you for the Public University Support Fund. As explained by email to you a couple of weeks ago, this is a result and an update to how the Department of Administrative Services is calculating CSL for those support funds, and it relates to the assumptions around the expiring pension obligation bonds for colleges and universities and how those are treated within the CSL methodology. So obviously it all gets quite technical. Jim Pinkard is on the line and can certainly go into greater detail about the changed calculations that resulted in that drop in the current service level calculation for those funds. So I know we'd be happy to spend time on that if folks want to dig in. Those CSL figures still represent increases of 9.3 and 7.5% respectively to those. I actually think I might have gotten those figures wrong, maybe looking in the wrong place. They still represent increases to the Community College Support Fund and the Public University Fund Support Fund by roughly 14% and 7% respectively. So increases over the 2025-27 biennium, but not quite at the level that we had expected when we presented these figures to you in June. Our intent with the rest of today's meeting, as the chair noted, indicated to representatives of the Oregon Community College Association and the Coalition of Oregon Public Universities that we'd welcome them to provide a few minutes of comment on the materials that are in your packet and the emerging agency request budget. So Abby Lee and Mary Moeller, respectively, and then invite questions, comments, discussion on the part of commissioners. Mr. Chair, I think if you want to move directly into hearing from our partners, that would be appropriate now, unless there's anything for me at this point. You're on mute. Greg, you're muted.
Sorry, I didn't realize there's any more to say, so I had, anyway. Welcome, Abby Lee. I see that you're ready, and thank you for being here and providing your input on this budget request.
Thank you, Chair Heyman, Vice Chairman Simnett, and Director Cannon, and commissioners. I'll just take a couple of minutes. I just wanted to be here to let you know that we, again, express our appreciation for a couple of weeks ago when the CSL proposal was changed. Jim Pinkard and Donna Llewellyn reached out to us, and we were able to meet to immediately try to understand these changes. And so I just wanted to reassure you that we've gone back and talked to our colleges, and we think that this more closely aligns with the preparations that our colleges have been making to get ready for these per site accounts. And so as you see these increases, they still reflect that. And should there be any concern about whether or not the colleges would be good stewards of these dollars and still need these dollars, I wanted to make sure that I expressed that on the record. And for the record, I'm Abby Lee, Executive Director of the Oregon Community College Association. And we have a number of individuals who are also here today, should you have specific questions about how that is going to impact the colleges. But as Director Cannon said, and as you know, this is very complex as it has to do with those per site accounts. And so we are happy to answer questions and really appreciate your continued time and diligence in looking at this issue before your decision in August. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Abby. Yeah, let's move on to Mary Moeller, and then we'll have some conversation. Thanks for being here, Mary.
Great, thank you. Good morning, Chair Heyman and Commissioners. For the record, my name is Mary Moeller, and I'm the Executive Director of the Coalition of Oregon Public Universities. Thank you for allowing me a little time to speak to the 27-29 agency request budget that you'll be discussing during today's special meeting. I know you have limited time for discussion, so I'll be brief. Like I mentioned during my public comments at your June meeting, historically, there have always been technical differences between the DAS-CSL calculation and the OPU's calculation of university base funding. With 27-29 comes no difference, and both the expiration of some state PERS side accounts as well as the expiration of the pension obligation bonds. Those simultaneous actions may have had a role in this cycle's gap in calculations. We recognize that the DAS-CSL always becomes the starting point for the HECC agency request budget. The public universities appreciate the difficult position you are in and realize that you will be unfortunately constrained to the DAS-CSL. We hope that future budget cycles will include an improved process and methodology for calculating the PUSF-CSL. This most recent process was frustrating and less transparent, mostly due to DAS's inability to produce a CSL in a timely manner. The DAS-CSL consistently uses a methodology that assumes our employee cost inflation is less than state employee cost inflation by using the non-state employee rate for public universities, despite being required to offer substantially the same benefits as state agencies. We have communicated that we believe our university-based funding, UBF, increase of 8.52% is the bare minimum for the 27-29 budget and will still involve very difficult cuts and tuition increases. The UBF should be considered the floor and should be the starting point for the governor's recommended budget. We are hopeful the governor will take the Prosperity Council's recommendation to align our state funding with neighboring states seriously. This will take leadership, commitment, and long-term planning. I also want to briefly touch on the anticipated shortfall of the Oregon Tribal Student Grant, which I know is also part of your agency recommended budget. We want to thank the HECC for communicating with tribal nations and the governor's office around the anticipated shortfall of roughly $4 million to meet the needs of increased enrollment to the Oregon Tribal Student Grant. We strongly urge the HECC to move forward with the request to the Emergency Board in September for the program. Any delay in this process puts tribal students in greater uncertainty around their access to future benefits and potentially places greater financial strain on public universities and our financial aid enterprises. We're also concerned to see the HECC's ARB does not fund the OTSG to fully meet the current needs of Oregon's tribal students. And again, we know you're constrained, but at the same time that we're planning to ask the Emergency Board for $4 million increase to this biennium's appropriation of $26 million for the OTSG, next biennium's request is only $28 million. This would be less money in the next biennium than we are currently advocating for this biennium. Continuing to underfund the OTSG will simply result in us being back in the same position in the future and will not solve the problem. Furthermore, it continues to put Oregon's promise to tribal communities and their tribal students in jeopardy, which we know you believe is important. We urge the HECC to move forward with the September e-board ask for the OTSG, and we also urge HECC and the governor's office to fund the OTSG at the true anticipated need for the next biennium. Thanks for your time today.
Thanks, Mary. I just want to note that Commissioner Davis-Boucher has joined us. Thank you. Welcome this morning. And then I'd ask, do we have questions for our Abby or Mary at this point before we dive into the details of the agency request budget? Yes, Commissioner Devlin.
Could you explain, this is for the universities. You have a master agreement that covers all the universities for your SEIU local. It is virtually the same local as the state has, but with a different contract. I know you're still in negotiations. I believe you were as of last week. But what you're debating appears to be quite similar in what they agreed to, even though the contracts have different dates. Quite similar to what the state agreed to. And I think they represent about roughly 1/3 of all university employees.
Yeah, Commissioner Devlin, I don't actually know the exact number, which I can get, but yeah, it's a pretty, I mean, we're small compared to their overall membership.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's about right. But I can get those details for you.
And you're still in negotiations, correct?
Yeah, we're still in bargaining, so I can't say much.
Okay.
And I'm not at the table, just to be very clear that those are the individual universities are at the table.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Sure.
Other questions? Abby, Abby Lee, I have a question for you, and I don't want to belabor this much, but I guess I want to have a clearer understanding of how the initial community college calculation of need was so dramatically different then. And you've said, well, it's related to side accounts and mostly, and I understand that way too much, but I'm just, I guess I want to dispel any, in your answer or response, I want to dispel any, I think, thought that that the community colleges have simply decided to reconstruct their ask so it better matched. So tell me a little bit more about what you learned in that process, so that we don't do it again.
I think, thank you, Chair Heyman, and as you allude, deeply the constraints and the challenges we have. I think Mary Muller also alluded to that in her, or spoke directly to that. This really is a change in how DAS was doing their calculations. When we came to you with our recommended ask, I think I was very clear that this was a critical service level rather than a CSL. And we were coming in with a pragmatic ask that was holistic and looking at all of the constraints and challenges that you as HECC were looking at, as well as what we could see the state was also looking at in many of the other effects of the federal changes. And so we came in with just a very honest baseline ask. And our colleges, there are 17 locally elected colleges who have differing challenges on these per site accounts. And so as we came forward, we did not believe that could be part of our ask. We really felt like that was something that we were going to have to absorb. And as we talked about the $169 million of reserve funding that we are already using, deficit funding essentially, that was something that we were just calculating as something that was ongoing cost of doing business that we did not see the state was going to come forward. So it is encouraging. And as I said last month, when it was almost 18%, it was very encouraging that the state was going to come forward with some part of a shared cost in this. We are 2 years ahead of the most of our universities and the state. The state will be in this similar issue 2 years from now. And so saw this as a little bit of foreshadowing for perhaps how the state was going to handle this. And we, as I said last month, are committed to using those dollars for these PERS costs, which, as you know, are also employee costs. So it really wasn't a recalculation. We also were a little stunned at the 18%. Again, recognizing that all of those dollars can and should be used, but it also didn't fully illustrate how much our colleges have been putting money aside and anticipating some of the cost savings on the PERS bonding that will be changing. So thank you for giving me an opportunity. We really haven't recalculated. We just are saying, okay, if this is how DAS is doing it, and this is how the CSL process is going this time, we are excited perhaps that there is some conversation about how CSL will be calculated differently in the future, and appreciated that this really was a constraint of not being able to recognize savings as well as increased cost.
Thank you, Abby. That's very, very helpful.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Other questions, comments? Great. I guess we'll turn it back to Ben for a broader conversation on the ARB.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I don't intend to present any more information. Again, your materials are substantially the same as what you've seen previously and discussed previously, with updates to current service level and to the POPs to reflect ongoing conversations and the revisions that have just been described. There are, again, I'll note, there are other technical updates in some of the figures. So if you're comparing the July materials with the June, you will see some other very modest adjustments to some of these figures, and we're happy to explain any of those, but they're really probably wanted to focus on the biggest changes, which related to the calculations of CSL for the community college and public university support funds. But otherwise, we're, Jim, myself, open to questions or conversation amongst commissioners about this agency request budget and the action that you will be asked to take in August.
Commissioner Devlin. Mr. Devlin, you're muted.
Now I'm not, I guess. In regards to both Ben and Jim, in regards to the change in methodology for the PERS calculation, and in asking you to limit the conversation to PERS, not necessarily other needs that the community colleges or the universities believe they have, do you think that there's general acceptance of the new methodology and that it truly accurately reflects the actual costs for PERS, not necessarily other needs that both entities might need in their support funds, but for PERS, that the new methodology actually reflects their costs?
Jim, I'll look to you if you have, based on your conversations with colleges and universities, have a sense of this.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. For the record, Jim Pinkard, Operations and Finance. I have not, Commissioner Devlin, in great detail asked the institutions that question and really pressed them on an answer. I can tell you that the methodology in use today is designed specifically to capture the true expected cost for benefits, healthcare and PERS alike. And on the PERS side specifically, though, it is based on data received from PERS where it's a blended rate across all the institutions and covered classes, participating employee classes at PERS. So I think there's, in general, yes, the answer is yes. I think it captures that true cost. But for individual institutions, though, because their PERS contributions and their experience is very different, then I want to clarify and be very transparent that that answer might differ by institution because of that.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Commissioner Devlin.
Of the five different factors that are put into the CSL, PERS traditionally has been adjusted when there are final PERS numbers. Are we dealing with projected PERS numbers now, or is this final?
We are dealing with projected numbers.
Okay.
Commissioner
And the universities and community still have the expectation that once final rates come in, the CSL could be adjusted if they were higher or lower. Because that's been the practice in the past. It's my understanding. Is that correct?
As I understand it, the typically that there is an attempt by legislative fiscal office staff, as I understand it, when we get further in the development of the budget, and so we have, in phase one of the development process, ARB, December is the governor's request budget, GRB. In the spring, usually around February, March is when PERS has a better handle and releases publicly those actual rates. So I believe, if I understand the process correctly, and I may be mischaracterizing it a little bit, but I believe there's an attempt to assess that at that point in the process for LAB development. Yes.
Okay. That's been my general understanding and past practice. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, but I do want to quickly say, Mr. Chair, for purposes of our ARB, though, if that won't be done in time for us to submit our agency request budget in August. So,
Understand.
Thank you, and thank you, Jim. Other questions? I see Commissioner Dembro.
Thanks, Chair. I have a question for Ben and one for Jim. Ben, so will we be, just following up on Mary's point about the tribal grant, will we be making that request to the E-Board in September? Is that still the plan?
Commissioner Dembro, we will make that. We plan to make an emergency board request before the end of this calendar year, and that may be September. It may be a later emergency board, depending on the direction and feedback that we get from the Chief Financial Office of Department of Administrative Services and the Governor's Office. But they, in directing us not to request funding at the June e-board for the tribal student grant, they were very clear that they expected that we would make a request at a subsequent e-board after the summer. And so I don't think we are certain yet whether that will be in September. But part of the possible reason for waiting later in the year would be to the November, December e-board would be to have a clear handle on fall term enrollment and actual tribal grant utilization. So I think it's possible that we'll be advised to wait until that later e-board, but there's certainly an expectation among legislative leaders and among the governor's staff and CFO that we will make that supplemental funding request for the tribal grant before the end of this calendar year.
Thanks. That's very helpful. It does make sense to see what fall enrollment looks like. Jim, I have a question. Following up on Abby Lee's point that we, of course, want the CSL to be as accurate as possible in terms of reflecting added costs, but also added savings. So this adjustment makes sense from that perspective. But I'm wondering, is this I don't know, what do we call it, an error? Is this error something that applied to all the CSL calculations that the state does, or is it just ours that they weren't including the potential savings? I'm curious about that. Are there adjustments being made across the board, or is it just for us?
I don't have an answer for you on that, Commissioner Dembro, about what's happening across the state enterprise on that. What I can tell you is that the explanation DAS provided us was that the updates reflect information based in the PERS letter or the Milliman letter from the actuaries of PERS. So their expression of explanation was these changes are not policy reductions. We're reflecting updated data to determine the continuing costs of pension obligation bond debt, not costs that no longer exist, right? So by setting the pension obligation bond debt service at 0, what DAS staff concluded was that that's actually not consistent with the calculation methodology, in the sense that if those costs are going away, well, that's not a current service cost. So therefore, the calculation methodology does need, in fact, to reflect the decrease for that cost category into the next biennium. So I think in that sense, I would suspect if our DAS colleagues were in the room, they would probably say we're doing that across the state enterprise. Again, current service level is an expression of the continued cost of providing service into the next biennium, plus and minus. So
No, I think it's self-evident. It's just surprising that that wasn't part of the initial calculation. Thanks.
Thank you. I saw Commissioner Devlin had another question.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I was just gonna, I think it was the community college director that indicated this. The state does face the same situation actually 2 years from now. So we'll see some adjustments there, but it probably will be 2 years from now.
Yeah.
And I don't know about all of the other public entities, cities and counties, et cetera, that are under PERS and special districts.
Other questions, comments?
Looks like Commissioner Lawson.
Commissioner,
Yes, Commissioner Lawson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have a question for Director Cannon. Director Cannon, based on the figures Mary Mueller just shared with us in her testimony, I saw she was saying that the Oregon Tribal Student Grant needs $4 million from the Emergency Board request to support the current enrollment success, putting our actual operational need roughly $30 million. But I saw that our ARB, the current one that we're working on, limits the grant to $28.4 million. I just was thinking that this really just means our proposed budget falls short of what we really do need in this next biennium to support our Indigenous students. I was a little concerned just because we have our NASA group at LCC and I was talking to some students there. So I was just concerned about the strictly applying the DAS CSL limits in this instance might prevent us from fulfilling our established commitments to Oregon's tribal communities. I'm just wondering if staff could commit to drafting a POP that aligns OTSG funding with actual projected demographic needs instead of just relying just on those CSL baselines.
Yeah, thanks, Commissioner Lawson. You make an important point that I agree with. It seems quite evident that the current service level calculation for the tribal student grant for 27-29, based as it is on an insufficient level of funding to serve tribal students in 2025-27, will not be sufficient, come close to being sufficient for the upcoming biennium. You've requested that we draft a POP.
Mm-hmm.
To do so would be in violation of the governor's direction that the agency not request resources over CSL without finding an offset within the budget, within our agency request budget. I think there is an opportunity to work with the governor and her staff, as we've begun to do, in the development of the GRB to try to elevate this funding need for her. I am quite confident in the governor's commitment to the Oregon Tribal Student Grant Program. And I believe it is her intent to fully fund it. And I believe she expects agencies to adhere strictly to the requirements that she's imposed upon them for agency request budget. So I think what I'm suggesting is that rather than developing a POP at this late stage of the game that would violate the governor's expectation and direction to agencies in the development of their ARBs, that we instead continue to work with her to raise this as a funding priority, to establish that at the technical CSL, it really does not meet even the current biennium's needs, much less the next biennium's needs for tribal students, and therefore we strongly urge her to put full funding within the governor's recommended budget. We had some success with that strategy actually 2 years ago. Commissioners may remember we were in a similar position with this program. She did include within her governor's request budget an increase to the tribal student grant that I believe we had not been able to or had chosen not to include within our ARB. That unfortunately, her requested increase was not followed by the legislature. So again, this is, we have to get a lot of folks on board. It starts with the ARB, GRB, LAB. But I'm optimistic that we can work with her during the fall, her and her staff, to include full funding for the tribal student grant, or at least an increase over the CSL, which will clearly not be sufficient in her governor's request budget. And Jim, did you want to? Looks like you had a.
I did, yes, Ben. Thanks. I just wanted to take the opportunity to brag about the talented HECC staff. So we, just for your awareness as commissioners, our talented OSAC team and operations teams have been collaborating with DAS staff on understanding the magnitude of the issue, agreeing to how they're going to forecast the need for that program in particular. It's a newer program, so we don't have as much history as we do for some of the other programs. Just to forecast going forward is just one of the challenges. So they've been engaged in those conversations to date. And I think, to Ben's point, are looking forward to a more detailed conversation in the fall once we have more clarity around fall enrollments and what the actual need then is based on that enrollment, using an updated forecast to then drive that conversation. So just wanted to brag about the high quality staff and all the work they're currently doing on that issue.
Thank you, Jim. And Commissioner Lawson, thank you for that question. Other questions? Yes, Commissioner Middleton.
Thank you, Chair Heyman. This may be a little bit off topic, but I'm just wondering if we will have an opportunity to delve in a little bit to the formula for the CCSF, and in particular the growth management cap and reimbursable versus reimbursed FTE, and how that is working across the 17 colleges.
I'll invite Jim to make maybe brief comments about this. I'll note that it's an important issue and one that we are certainly prepared to discuss and work with the commission on. It is, and I think we have time. We are planning time in an upcoming meeting, and Jim can describe that. We typically distinguish between, as you understand, Commissioner Middleton, between the sort of budget discussion that's focused on the amounts, and then the distribution discussion, which is focused on how the amount is distributed. But they are related, and distribution methodology is really, really important. And we do have sort of separate work streams related to the Community College Support Fund distribution model. And Jim, if you want to say a little more about that, and if the chair wants, we can probably we can spend more time on that this morning. But go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. Just to build on what Ben said, we do plan on bringing that conversation to a funding and achievement subcommittee meeting, likely in October. Is I think currently penciled in on the calendar. Between now and then, of course, happy to answer questions and schedule separate meetings for those interested folks. But we have right now a CCSF review work group delving into those issues, and that's why I was smiling, Commissioner Middleton, during your question, because we've been digging deeply into that issue as a work group. And so happy to talk about what the work group has found, kind of their findings, talk to you about their recommendations come October, and how that translates to funding distributions and what that means for the growth management component and some of the other mechanisms in the formula. But
thanks, Jim. Commissioner Middleton, I just wanted to respond or add to your questions and comments. I have, especially on the community college side, sort of more than a deep understanding of the distribution formula. And I have my own interests in revisiting a variety of issues and components of those models, and look forward to, I think, deep thought and conversation about what that might look like for the future. I'm a little reluctant to make that part of today's conversation, and I'll tell you why. Because we have a long history of confusing the budget with the distribution, and I think, at its most base level, distribution doesn't affect the amount of money that we have to distribute, and it just gets handed out in different ways. And when we add FTEs to it, it just means we get more FTE, but we have less money per FTE, and those are that's a very important conversation, and I do think it plays an important role in our future understanding on how we best support our universities and community colleges. But if it's okay, I'd like to reserve that for a conversation specifically committed to that issue, but I do appreciate you bringing it up. Then, Commissioner, Director Cannon, I think the question I have, I think I'm not alone in this, is not really directly related to the ARB, but to the narrative that we would hope accompanies it. I think we all have a strong sense that we do understand the limitations of what we can put into the ARB, and we will comply with the governor's directives regarding that, and we'll hopefully vote to approve that. But I think we're also interested in making sure that the narrative accompanying that budget represent our conviction that this is inadequate to the actual needs of the community colleges and universities and to the students we serve. And I think, at least as my understanding of the Commission's roles, we sort of have a dual purpose here, or dual role. We have one is, yes, we have to approve this budget, but we also have our call as commissioners, we have a responsibility to honestly represent the needs of the institutions. And so I don't know the process for, nor, but I'm interested in sort of your thoughts about what that narrative can look like in order to, within the constraints that are given us, at least represent our sense that the RB is not an adequate representation of what our institutions actually need.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. I can think of at least 3 ways that the Commission can serve that latter goal or responsibility that you described of advocating on behalf of Oregonians, learners, institutions. One is through the budget narrative that will be included within the very large, many 100-page document that constitutes the actual agency request budget. A portion of that narrative will describe, again, in text, not numbers, but in text, the Commission's view of the actual needs of Oregon higher education in order to reach state goals. We presented a draft of that section, that is sort of a couple of pages of draft text at your last meeting. And I think generally the Commission appreciated the language there, and we intend to include that in the agency request budget narrative. So that's one way in which the record can reflect the Commission's view of the actual needs of Oregon higher education. The second is through the conversation that you have at the August meeting in particular. I mean, I think it's true this morning as well, but certainly in any public setting, and particularly in the August meeting, in the adoption of the discussion and likely adoption of the agency request budget, commissioners will have the opportunity to state their perspective on what you're adopting, what it represents, and what it doesn't represent in terms of meeting the needs of Oregon learners, the state, its institutions. And finally, many commissioners will remember that 2 years ago, in the meeting, the August 2025 meeting where you adopted, or August 2024 meeting where you adopted the 2025-27 agency request budget, you also authorized the chair to draft a letter to the governor to accompany the budget that put on the record, again, sort of formally, the commission's concerns about some of the specific ways in which that agency request budget underrepresented the needs of various institutions, programs, I think including the tribal student grants, certainly including the community college and public university support funds. We published that letter alongside the agency request budget at the end of the month. So I think there are likely other ways that the commission could establish, even as it moves forward with a budget that it is concerned about, establishes, publicly that concern, but those are a few.
Director Cannon, I really appreciate that. I'd be honest with you, I'd forgotten about the chair's letter 2 years ago, and I certainly would hope that the commission direct the chair or me to issue a similar letter this year. I realize that this isn't going to change the budget so much as perhaps change some of our thinking. I would like, if I were to write this letter, I would like the letter not to represent just the shortfall with regards to funding other AB, but also the missed opportunity that the investment in higher education represents to our state as a whole. And I guess I'm interested in a very face-forward statement about what we think the role of higher education is for the state and its importance in our future. And so anyway, your thoughts, that would, if I am to issue a letter similar to that, I would like it to carry that message as well. And this is not an action item, we're having a conversation. So, but I don't want to misrepresent the commission should we do this. Questions, comments? Yes, Commissioner Dembro.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I really appreciate the point you just made, and it really aligns with something I've been thinking about. As we're seeing the colleges and universities finalizing their budgets for next year, we're seeing lots of cuts that are happening, and I think, and I'm just become really acutely aware of the impact of those cuts, and the cumulative effect of those cuts, and it's really moving us in the opposite direction of where we should go. And if you factor in the missed opportunities where we know we should be heading, in offering opportunities for students and the economic impacts that having a more skilled workforce could give us, those are all things I think that should go into a letter like that. The legislature asked the universities to, or the HECC, to do an analysis of university efficiency last year. And, I think they did a good job of showing the steps that they're taking to be more efficient. But, what I think isn't fully appreciated is the negative impacts of many of those forced decisions. And so something, that could be reflected in this letter, I think would be very helpful.
Thank you, Commissioner Dembro. I see Commissioner Lawson has a question.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Another question for Director Cannon, still regarding the earlier testimony that we heard Something Abby Lee said that caught my eye. She shared in her testimony, our community colleges are currently drawing on $169 million in reserve funds to maintain operations and operating deficits. And she noted that they're able to manage the recent $35 million CSL reduction primarily because they had proactively prepared for such adjustments. But I'm thinking, relying on institutional reserves to sustain these core operations, for me, it just raises concerns about what their long-term financial stability is. So I'm wondering if you could share what mechanisms HECC staff might implement to ensure the $35 million CSL revision does not accelerate the depletion of our local reserves and potentially impacting adjunct faculty and frontline staff in the coming biennium.
Yeah, we may invite Abby to clarify or correct me if I get this wrong, but the figure she cited, or that the colleges initially presented around the potential or predicted use of reserves, was based on the budget request that they made to the commission in May, I believe, prior to the publication of initial CSL guidance. So I believe that $169 million figure was actually an early May projection, and we'd have to lean on the colleges to understand, now that we have the actual CSL figure, how that projection might be different. My sense is that because CSL, even with the downward revision, is higher than the colleges had, more than the colleges have requested in May, that the expected use of reserves might be somewhat lower. But I see Abby has come on screen, and I may have gotten it completely wrong, so I'm glad she did.
Abby.
Thank you, Director Cannon. Thank you, Commissioner Lawson, for the question. Actually, the reserve or deficit spending that we talked about in our initial request was actual dollars reflected in the 25-27. And so that was more just perspective of saying, even at this rate, it will not, as Mary shared with the universities, it is not going to solve all of the funding issues. We are still facing tuition increases, program cuts, and employee reductions. So that number was reflective of what we have spent and anticipating that we will continue to have to rely on savings and reductions. So thanks for the opportunity to clarify.
Yeah, and I mean, in terms of HECC tools, as commissioners understand, the management of college budgets is the responsibility of community college district boards, and the HECC does not establish policy or otherwise oversee district level decisions about reserves, reserve spending, employee contracts, and staffing levels, etc. So this budget request and development process is one where we attempt to understand from the colleges information like Abby has just presented, and use that in aggregate to explain to the legislature and the governor what the impacts of different levels of state funding are likely to be in aggregate. And based on Abby's comments just now and other information we've acquired under the sort of emerging ARB CSL approach for community colleges, we would likely be describing to the governor and legislators that this funding level would, for many colleges, if not most or all colleges, require some level of reserve spending, employee reductions, potential program cuts. And we want to be as accurate and transparent in the delivery of that information as possible. So I think that's sort of my effort to reflect our role as a communicator and a translator, versus that role as a policy maker with respect to what are ultimately locally elected community college district board choices about how to balance budgets in the face of these kinds of shortfalls.
Thank you, Director Cannon. That that was very helpful. I think I was just really trying to. Uh, I understand that we don't manage, of course, the local budgets of other institutions. I think I was just asking, what staff might uh, do or implement to make sure that the CSL revision doesn't accelerate the depletion of reserves locally. Not that we have anything to do with that specifically, causing it to deplete. I just didn't want us to accelerate that. But I appreciate your question, and I thank you, Director Lee, for your answer.
Thank you, Commissioner Lawson. Commissioner Devlin, you have a question?
Yes, for Ben. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In this narrative that accompanies the budget, I do believe the previous 2 pages that we saw did mention some of our concerns about how CSL is calculated. I would hope that in the broader narrative that we would hopefully receive before the Commission's consideration of the budget in August, that we would go into a little bit more detail on that about what our concerns are. And while I think our concerns are in terms of how at least 2 or 3 of the items are calculated, the largest concern is the way this is constructed. The state's contribution to the E&G costs is roughly between 25 and 26%, and also in terms of the increases. And as long as the state has that portion of the formula just basically ingrained in the process, you are always going to be short in terms of meeting the needs of community colleges and universities. I think that's the principal thing that needs to be reconsidered. I don't know how easy that would be to do. I think maybe even a first step would be somehow that when the legislature receives this or the governor forwards it, that it's fairly clear what the state is actually paying at this point. That they are paying roughly 25, 26%. We are, I don't know what the current one is, 47th or 48th in the nation. That we have the highest tuition. Many of the Western colleges. But I think it's really important to communicate that aspect of this, that as long as we're fixated on, even if it doesn't say it overtly, the way the process works means that the state picks up 25 to 26% of the cost and leaves the remainder to students and perhaps other transfers.
Yeah, I certainly take the point. I want to be careful about the commitments we make this morning regarding the narrative that you will see in August. Our staff does an enormous amount of work to generate the many hundreds of pages of budget reports and narrative that accompanies the ARB that we submit at the end of August. We are typically not able to complete that full process of writing and packaging the ARB in time for your August commission meeting. And so the materials that you'll receive for August will reflect, they'll be similar to what you've seen today. They will reflect the budget figures, the final budget figures, pop names, titles, amounts, and explanations. They will likely not include the bulk of the narrative that will be submitted along with those budget figures in this 1,000-page report at the end of August. And so again, in prior years, and again this year, we'd expect that the motion that you'll consider in August would be to approve the budget figures, the budget amounts, the POPs, et cetera, and then to direct staff to complete the submission of the entire ARB under the chair's signature by the end of the month. That I can, however, I think, commit that the narrative will describe the issue that you're raising, Commissioner Devlin, about the proportion of educational costs that are borne by the state versus by, or the public, state and local, versus the student. And we describe in narrative sections that history and the shift over decades from public investment to student and family investment. I want to be slightly cautious around commitments about the degree to which the narrative would unpack the CSL methodology specifically. Obviously, we've had a lot of conversation about that at the commission. We are working on that with your help, Commissioner Devlin, with the governor's office and Department of Administrative Services. But I think we would be unlikely to recommend that within this agency request budget submission itself, there's a sort of argument around the current service level methodology. But I think that the context, the sort of history and context and narrative that accompanies the budget will certainly drive the point around the proportion of educational costs borne by the state over time versus students.
I'm going to be honest here, Commissioner, somebody has their hand up, but I can only see commission ... So I don't know who it is, but I'm calling that person.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. My apologies. I'm not sure why that's not showing up. This is Commissioner Lawson for the record, Mr. Chair. I just have a question for Jim, if I may. University representatives have explicitly pointed out to us that the current DAS CSL calculation applies a non-state employee inflation metric to estimate our wage and benefit gap. And I'm just thinking that, or not that I'm thinking, but I noticed that this approach categorizes university staff similarly to the way that outside contractors are, which appears to structurally undercalculate true labor costs. And I'm thinking that given that institutions must provide benefits comparable to state agencies, for that, relying strictly on this methodology creates a multi-million-dollar funding gap that local administrators will likely have to address through constrained worker wages and increased student tuition at their local institutions. So I'm wondering, given these outcomes, how can the commission confidently validate an ARB relying on a formula that may inadvertently disadvantage our campus workforce?
Appreciate the, go ahead.
No, I'll let you go before I do. Okay. Sorry.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Lawson, for the question. I think that's the central issue that that we've raised in the past with the current methodology, right? We have an existing issue that presents a challenge for the state and for our public institutions for education, both community colleges and public universities, whereby to your point and to highlight Commissioner Devlin's commentary and the point that Ben has made about, you know, that structural difference or gap or variation between, and I think you heard Director Moeller talk about that issue as well, like that gap exists, but the DAS calculation is something that DAS controls. We have in the past engaged in productive conversation with them about that. And I think, again, to Ben's point with Commissioner Devlin's help, we're going to continue that conversation. But there's, at this point, that gap exists. It's a known entity, but as staff, there isn't really anything we can do about it.
Thank you, Jim. What I was going to add, I think, is basically building on what Director Cannon said, was in the context of this narrative. I think I'm interested in simply identifying or recognizing that the methodology in which we calculate CSL and basically our understanding of what it is plays a significant role in the current and future budget conversations, but not getting into the details of what we think the problems are. In fact, I have a list of what I think are problems with the CSL. Good number of them we haven't even discussed. So I'm really reluctant to say what we think the problem is, but simply a recognition that we think there are challenges that we think, and that we think that finding some resolution around how we do CSL plays a significant role in the way in which we build our budgets for the future. I think that represents something similar to what Director Cannon indicated in terms of the specificity to be included in the narrative. I also wanted to respond to I think it was Commissioner Lawson's comment. I was responsible for institutional level budgets for 17 years, so I have a bit of an understanding in that area. And I'm grateful that we don't have a responsibility for that. Two, I think it's extremely important for us to understand that a budget, even for a biennium, that seems like a long period of time, is merely a snapshot in an overall, hopefully thoughtful strategy that an institution has with regards to its fiscal sustainability. It would be there are risks in order that are associated with taking a look at a biennial budget and thinking that we understand what that means with regards to its institutional fiscal plan. For instance, at my institution, we would intentionally spend down reserves in order to do things that we understood in our future. And you, as a commission, might go, well, that looks like they don't have enough money to do what they're doing. And we're saying, no, that's actually the way we designed our use of reserves. There are other times when we're forced to use reserves in ways that don't represent our overall economic strategy. And so in the absence of a broader understanding, I think it's dangerous to take a look at an individual biennial budget and say, oh, we think we understand the fiscal condition of that institution. Because, in my institution, we'd look at 4 biennia in order to make a decision about one of them. And because that's the way you should do it, and I think it'd be inappropriate for us to look at an individual budget and think we understand the fiscal strategy of that institution. So glad to take arguments on that one, but so that's I think it's important, but I just don't think it's our issue. So Commissioner Lawson? I think it's Commissioner Lawson. Thank you.
Absolutely, Mr. Chair. Not to debate the issue that you just brought up, I'm just asking a clarifying question on your point. I guess my initial thought was that I wasn't trying too much to look at exactly what each institution is looking at over the time period to develop their budget. I just thought that as a student commissioner, it would be very important to speak about my direct life experiences as someone who walks the halls of college institutions today, knowing what students deal with generally across the community college landscape. So I'm just wondering if you could clarify on how that, I guess, what that should look like for me and other commissioners moving forward, if we go out with what you were just talking about.
Yeah. I think that question's for me, so I'll respond. I would just say that I think my sense is that we as commissioners all share a deep commitment to the students' interests and needs, and with regards to higher education. And I think we have a role to play in that. Individual institutions play that out. I've not met a institution in the state that isn't focused on the student. They understand it and represent it differently sometimes in their budgets, but that is a central commitment. I think that our institutions and we as a commission share. I think that at an individual institutional level, not as a commissioner, but certainly I had students ask me the questions about how does that budgetary decision impact the students at my institution, and that's an appropriate question for them to have asked me at that level, and I was pressed to do that. I don't. Again, I think that our job in this is to make sure that we accurately represent the fiscal need in order to serve the role that we believe higher education is called to play in this state. And we do have a distribution formula, which I think in collaboration with business institutions can help us to direct those funds towards what we understand to be broad student interests and community interests. And I hope that, and I do believe that as we have those conversations, we very clearly have student impact in mind. So. Other questions, comments? Or are we to the end of this meeting? I'll think that we are then. Just to remind you, this is, I think, and has been a valuable opportunity for us to gain a better understanding of their ARB, what we can, with regards to a decision that we'll be asked to make in our August board meeting. I think as Director Cannon has indicated, what we see now is basically what will be represented to us and presented to us for approval in August. And we have an obligation, I think, to approve something, to put it forward to the governor. I think I'll be working with Director Cannon with regards to better understanding the narrative, and then the opportunity that I might have as chair to provide an accompanying letter for that budget. So I think that that's well clarified out of this conversation. Anything else for the good of the order? Then I adjourn this meeting. Thank you to all of you.
Thanks, everybody.